So grief is something that is part of all of our lives. And so tonight we're going to talk about that shared experience. So what is grief? There's a quote that says, "There are losses that rearrange the world, deaths that change the way you see everything, grief that tears everything down, pain that transports you to an entirely different universe, even while everyone else thinks that nothing has really changed." And that's something that we have, if you have gone through a deep loss, to me it was very shocking that the world was still continuing, that everybody went back to work, everybody just continued with life as normal, but mine was completely shattered. So that's something to think about, when somebody is grieving, that it's hard for them to do even normal things. So just keeping that in mind. So grief is the experience of coping with loss. Most of us think that grief is happening in that painful period that follows the death of a loved one, and it is. But grief can also accompany any event that disrupts our sense of normalcy. That includes loss of connections, so divorce, friendships, job loss, pets, financial stability. All of those things can cause us deep pain and sorrow. Your grief... I'm going to get on to the sound man. Just kidding. Your grief is unique to you. So we can experience the exact same loss and process that and handle it totally different. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. It's just, we all have different personalities. We have different upbringings, cultures, all of those things that affects how we handle things. So just remember that there's not a right or wrong way to do that. You can do that in your own way. So every one of us at some point in our life is going to experience a loss, and we're going to grieve. Our journeys are not going to be the same. Despite what you hear about the stages of grief, what you should be doing, you should be thinking, or should not think or feel, you're going to grieve and do the work of mourning in your own way. And that is perfectly okay. We encourage it. So we're going to talk a couple of things about what grief is and what grief is not. Grief is a journey, and it can be really messy. Anyone that has experienced that, you know that it can change from moment to moment, all over the place. It's rarely straightforward and just clean cut. Grief is having waves of emotions hit you at the strangest times. I heard someone say something about grief the other day that related to something I had experienced. Was the first time that I went in a grocery store, and people were just carrying on with life, and I'm like breaking down because someone cut me off with their buggy, and I'm like, do you know what I'm going through? Like, I didn't say that out loud, but it's just hits you out of nowhere. And we talk a lot in group about sometimes you may hear a song, or you may see something that reminds you of, your person or your loss. And you were having a great day, everything was fine, and now you're, curled up in your car bawling. And, that's going to happen. So grief is asking for help. And if nothing else you take away from that, well, there's a couple of things, but that is one thing that we really want you to know, is that it's very okay for you to talk about, and it's very okay for you to say, I'm struggling and I need help and I need somebody to talk to. Grief is sometimes putting your needs first, because sometimes you don't have the capacity to do anything for anybody else. And we're used to a culture, in this church especially, we are all about others.
But I think that's why it's really important for us to, hold each other up when we're going through hard times, because sometimes you don't feel like you have anything to give. And that's when someone else can step up and say, hey, I'm carrying you. I got you covered. Grief is an individual experience. Grief is normal. It's very normal. A lot of people think that there's something wrong with you or you're showing weakness if you are mourning or grieving, but it's very normal. Grief is allowing yourself to do what's right for you. It should be a judgment-free zone. And we talk a lot about our group is a safe space. No matter what you bring, we're here for it. Good, bad, ugly, messy, bring it. We're not scared of it. So grief is something that grows and changes as we do. So I may see something that, made me cry and break down a couple of years ago, and now it brings me joy. So it grows and changes. Grief is not moving forward and having to forget. Grief is not always needing to just push through, suck it up, put on a brave face. Grief is not the same for everyone. Grief is not always hard. And that's something that sounds kind of strange. And we've talked, about how sometimes, people are like, you seem like you're doing so good. And we're like, what does that mean? Let me fall apart. Yeah. Hang on. Let me go get my tears and I'll be right back. But some days can feel pretty normal. Like I'm having a pretty okay day, or maybe this last hour has been okay. So know that if you are, I think one of the things that kind of sticks us sometimes, and we all say it, but like, you're so strong, or you seem so strong. But we talk in group a lot that strength looks different at different times in your life. So sometimes just getting up out of the bed is you being strong. And we're encouraging people to know that that's okay, and we're proud of you for doing that and for not giving up. Grief is not ignoring it and hoping it just goes away. Hazel wants to come up here and help us. Grief is not something that you should have to hide from others. That's something we talk about as far as like, it makes people uncomfortable when we're sad. But I hope that, I feel like we're creating a culture here that we're okay with you bringing your hard stuff. And we're going to show up and we're going to support you in that and not let you be alone. Sometimes in grief, we feel crazy. And knowing that you're not crazy, but grief affects your mind, your body, your spirit. It's a mixture of feelings, and anybody that's experienced it, that can change from day to day, week to week, minute to minute. In those early days and weeks, it's normal to feel shock, numbness, disbelief, feelings of confusion or disorientation. There was a girl in our group that said, like, I can't remember things. I just, like somebody tells me something and I can't remember it. And I'm like, that's very normal in the grieving process. And she's like, I had no idea. So that was a comfort to her to know she's not going crazy, that she's just grieving. It's normal to feel afraid or anxious. It's also very normal to feel angry or have other explosive emotions like blame, resentment, or rage. Think of these feelings as a form of protest. So something in your life that gave you meaning has now been taken away from you. It's natural for your emotions to say, no, stop, I don't want this. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, sometimes people like, oh, I shouldn't be angry. God gave us that emotion. It's okay. We say all the time that God's not scared of, our emotions, and he's not angry with us or upset. He's a big God, and he can handle all of that, and we're grateful for his grace. Guilt and regret can also be a part of grief. Sadness, of course, is central to grief. It's normal to feel hurt, depressed, and as strange as it might sound, it's also normal to feel relief or release. It can be normal to feel relieved that the suffering is over. So a lot of these different things, you may think, why in the world would I feel that way, or you feel bad about that? It's just part of the process, and it's really okay.
Thank you, Addie, for defining grief for us and helping us to label grief, because when we are grieving or we experience loss, we don't always immediately identify our loss as grief or identify our pain as grief. We tend to leave that for sometimes death alone, and we don't always remember that loss and grief covers various things. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we grieve when grief does show up in our lives. How do we get through it? How do we navigate it? Is there a way to navigate it? Is there something that makes it more bearable? I have been thinking a lot today specifically. This just sort of dropped in my spirit when we think about opening ourselves up to grief and inviting grief into our lives when there's been a loss. We might say, why would we want to open ourselves up to this pain? Why would we want to open ourselves up to this suffering? Sometimes we can be quick to shove things down, move things aside. Some of us are really, really good at that. Some of us are not really good at that. I am not one of those people. I'm not a shover sometimes I'm a person that runs away. Rachel reminds me when I'm running away from something. But we can run away. We can be good hiders, be good shovers. So we don't want to open ourselves up to pain. We don't want to open ourselves up to suffering. But I've been thinking a lot about grief being this uninvited visitor in our lives. And when we think about an uninvited visitor in our homes, we think, okay, someone showing up when we're not prepared. Someone is showing up to our home when it is completely inconvenient, and maybe they are overstaying their welcome, right? So we really can parallel grief a lot to that uninvited visitor, because grief does show up when we are unprepared. Grief does show up and mess us up at really inconvenient times and really inconvenient places. And it does like to overstay its welcome in our lives. And so when we're thinking about grief and when we're trying to process our loss, we may try to shut the door on it, right? Wait it out until it leaves. Run away, hide. But grief has a way, no matter how hard we try to fill up our lives with other things, grief has a way of cramming itself in to the corners and the closets and to those unguarded places in our lives. And it will sit with you at your kitchen table. It will be present with you at holidays and family events where people are supposed to be laughing and it's supposed to be a joyful time. Grief will take a shower with you, ride in the car with you, get in bed with you. Grief will cover you up like a residue that you cannot wash off. And that is terrifying and painful, right? We want to push that away. We want to run away from that. Testing. Okay. We'll just push through.
I'm going to give you the anointed mic. Be careful.
Worthy is the Lamb. So inviting grief in and opening ourselves up to that is very uncomfortable. Falling into the hole when we think there's no way out at the time, terrifying. We don't want to be open to that, but allowing yourself to be open to your grief, allowing yourself to be present with your pain, affords you the opportunity to discover who and what is there to support you. We recognize and come to know that people are ready to show up for us, show up with us, and not to change our circumstance, not to fix us, because they can't. We know they can't. We hope they know they can't, because they can't. And there is no easy way to get through it. There is just moving through it. There are no instruction manuals. There are no timetables. There is just moving through. It's a journey. We talk in our sessions with our clients that we see about dosing our grief, dosing your pain, and that literally just means finding space to be present with your grief. Sob, cry, moan, groan, weep, lay in bed, do nothing, scream, punch things, maybe not people, maybe people. Do what you need to do to be present with your grief. Be present with that. We absolutely encourage that. You need to do that. Your body needs you to do that. People around you that love you need you to do that. But we know that if we allow the weight of our grief to crush us in one single sitting, and we attempt to navigate that without pause, it could quite literally impede our ability to survive, because the pain is too much. It's too much to bear. It's too painful. So we do encourage dosing your grief. And, yeah, set a timer. Schedule it. Plan it out in your day. Plan it out in your week. And that might sound a little like romanticizing the idea about, like, grieving. But if it's what you need to do and it works for you, do it. We know that you will need breaks from sitting with that pain. We all have duties. We all have things that we have to do to continue getting through life. We don't want to think about those things when we're grieving. Sometimes we can't. We have to be selective about what we put ourselves, throw ourselves into in the middle of our grief. Sometimes we don't know what we can handle until we're in the moment. And then we're like, oh my goodness, why did I say I would do this? Why am I here? Why am I around these people? I need to get away. Get me out of here now. She's running away. She's taking my place now. And so, but do what you can to invite the distractions in. Do what you need to do to get up from that place and be a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a caregiver, a daughter, a son, because we all somewhere in here hold some title. We work jobs, we serve in the church, and we wear different hats. So we're going to, in order to survive, we do somewhere have to involve ourselves in being with others, right? Our families, our friends, people around us. And so in those moments where you're needing a break, do what works for you. Hang out with your friends. Hang out with someone who is safe and who will be present with you. Serve, give, love. And you'll need breaks from both. You will need breaks from your people. And you will need to go back into your bed and cry and sob and weep and scream and punch things and ask God why. You'll need those moments, but you'll also need breaks from that. So dosing your grief, finding space for both, showing up for others and showing up for yourself. I'll change directions really quickly and just talk about grief when it comes to children. Children are very unique little people, and grief shows up in children's lives a lot like it does in adults' lives. There's going to be mood shifts, eating habits that change, sleeping habits that change, bathroom habits that change. You might notice an increase in separation anxiety. So our teenagers and our preteens might isolate a little bit more. They might withdraw socially. Their academics might decline. So we might, see some of those things that are unique to kids. But those things show up for us too as adults, right? And something very unique to children is play. And so our kids, we see a lot in sessions that when our kids have experienced something traumatic or something that has been a very sudden change in their life, they typically will reenact that through their play. So they might reenact that loss that they've just experienced. They might become a little obsessive about it in their play, with repetitive expressions and things of that nature. Really, for our kiddos when they're experiencing grief, our big kids and our little kids, routines are very important. Loss strips us of routine. Loss strips us of predictability. But our kids thrive on that. So maintaining what predictability you can when your kids are experiencing grief is important, and you need people that can help you do that, because you may not be able to do that by yourself. Our kids need us to just sort of be unconditional in our acceptance with them. Our kids process slower, so as adults, when we feel like maybe we're getting a handle on something, or when the rest of the world has gone back to its normal, our kids may just be beginning to process the loss. And so it might show up a little later for them, and we'll be present with that when it happens, right? Our kids also really thrive on connections. So if it has been really whatever kind of loss it has been for them, if it's been a move, if it's been a divorce, if it's been some relationship change or school change, whatever we can do to memorialize that or hold that space in remembrance for them is going to be important for them too, because they thrive on connections. And I know we talked about in one of our groups that kids don't always, they're little, so they're not always maybe going to remember things like we do. They may not remember the people that have been lost, right? And we can feel afraid of that because those people are really important to us, and we want them to be important to our kids. I grew up without any grandparents. I never knew, well, I sort of knew my mom's dad a little bit. I have like one snapshot memory, and that's it. But all of my grandparents passed away before I was born. But I feel like I know every one of them because my parents have talked about them consistently throughout my childhood. And that's meant so much to me because I wasn't able to make those connections for myself, but they helped make those connections for me. And so you can do that with your children or the children in your lives. So that was something that kind of stuck out to me, being a child that didn't know much about my own grandparents. Maybe that resonates with some of you. Just in closing and kind of transitioning over, want to end with just encouraging anyone in this room who has experienced loss. Maybe you didn't process it like you needed to or have needed to. Maybe you have thought all this time that you've been handling it really well, and even tonight is sort of opening a wound for you. If loss is present with you and you feel like you need support, we absolutely encourage that. There's 3 professionals here. There's professionals out in the crowd that are helpers with humans and that are licensed and equipped to sit with you in your grief and your sudden life changes. And we want to see you through. We want to guide you where you need to get to go on this grief journey. So whether that's with us, with someone else that we can lead you to or guide you to, we're here to talk afterwards if anyone needs to. And we know that Lighthouse is a safe place for a lot of people. And if you have made safe connections here, if you know safe people here, continue to lean into them. Continue to lean into God as you can, however you can, when you can, because we know that ultimately He does get us through our trials. So
that's very true, and obviously you all believe that, or you at least hope that to be true, because you're here tonight. And I'm very thankful for a God that takes care of us when we cannot take care of ourselves. And actually, that's a prayer that an evangelist years ago, Sister Potter, taught not just me, but she would tell people to pray, Lord, keep me when I cannot keep myself. And I think that's a prayer to pray in moments of grief, because we can't keep ourselves, right? We have moments where we just don't have capacity. And we do have a God that does carry us. And so the question really we ask is, where is God when I grieve? And that's a really big question about where God shows up, because we know God is big. We know God is capable. We know God has the ability to change circumstances in our lives. And loss can test your faith deeply. Loss can shake the foundation of your beliefs. It can turn your world upside down. We're told, God has the ability to heal. God has the ability to save. God can do the miraculous. And then we look at our life and we say, well, if He had the ability to do that, why didn't He? And we have that really big question of why. And I know growing up in my life, I was always taught, never question God, never ask God why. That's not an okay thing to do. And I feel like that He's okay with those questions. He's okay with us saying, I really don't get it. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. Because He's a really big God, and He has really big shoulders and can carry a lot, can carry much more than we could ever carry. So we fall into grief. We know that God orchestrates things in our lives. He allows suffering. Sometimes it is just sin in the world that creates suffering. Man has free will. Things happen. We don't know why, or, God chooses to step in sometimes, and sometimes He doesn't. But it leads us to a place of grief. And I want you to know that grieving is not a sin. And we don't talk about that enough, because we think grief is the opposite of faith. And it has nothing to do with faith. Grief is when we have a loss, and our human, mortal, present body and our mind can't comprehend the why of it. We can't even really comprehend death, can we? And loss, because we're so flesh and we're so present and right here, that the idea of death just seems obscure and unclear to us. And so we think, if I grieve, I don't have faith, I don't have trust, I'm not believing anymore. If I'm not radiating joy at all times, I'm sinning. And that is not the truth at all. We know that grief is a natural process. I would argue that grief is a gift. Because if we did not grieve, we would perish. We couldn't carry the suffering around with us and survive with that level of pain that we have inside at times from loss and from heartache. And so there's this process we go through that's grieving, and it's not a sin. I have experienced grief before. I mean, we all have had grief moments. I have two in my life specifically that I know were major moments of grief. One is very present, and that's my dad, who passed away 16 days ago. And that's a big one. Still working through that one, surprisingly enough. Can you imagine? 16 days and I'm still grieving? Where's my faith? And the other one, I was younger. I had no idea I was grieving this experience that I had. I had all the thoughts, I'm crazy, I don't have faith, this is sin. And I walked through that time. Looking back, I saw that it was deep, deep grief that I experienced. And I'm going to tell you, I was really mad at God the first time. And I'm going to tell you, I've had a few shouting matches with God this time. Thankfully, there's not been a bolt of lightning yet. If y'all read in the news that I've been struck by lightning, you know God was finally like, all right, okay, settle down. But in both times in my life, I have stomped my foot. I have shook my fist. I've said, this isn't right. You didn't get it right. You didn't read my plan. I made footnotes. I had the pages marked, had things highlighted. I had a whole plan laid out, God, and you didn't follow it. And I hate to tell you this, Lord, but this is your first mistake. And Lord, everybody gets one, so I'm going to give you a pass on this, but just know you got it wrong. I have been so furious with God. And every time, he sees me like a toddler. Because we're never more than a toddler in the eyes of God. The wisest of us, the ones with the most wisdom that they could possibly hold, it's about 2 or 3 years old in the eyes of God. And when our toddlers have those moments where they fall out and they cry and they sob, we recognize they're tired, they're hungry, they don't have capacity, they don't understand, they don't see the big picture. I'm not going to let them lick every doorknob at in the house. I'm not going to let them chew on the bottom of, their friend's shoe. I know I'm a terrible parent because I didn't let them drink that poison, but I'm not going to do it no matter how much they scream. We know these things, toddlers don't. And that's who we are to God. When we stomp and cry and snot and we say, what are you doing? This isn't fair. He just sits with us in those moments. He lets us cry. And when we're done, I feel tears coming. When we're done, he invites us into his lap and he says, come sit in my lap and let me hold you because it's going to be okay, right? Because that's who he is. He's love. He's absolutely love personified. We know that Jesus wept when he was on earth. We know that he walked this earth like we have, like we do. And we know he felt the things we feel. I heard this quote the other day. Hold on one second, guys. It's all the emotion. I read this quote the other day, and I just thought it was so beautiful, so I'm going to share it with you. And it's about Lazarus. It says, he cried. He knew Lazarus was dead before he got the news, but still he cried. He knew Lazarus would be alive again in moments, but still he cried. He knew death here is not forever. He knew eternity and the kingdom better than anyone else could, yet he wept. Because this world is full of pain and regret and loss and depression and devastation. But he wept because knowing the end of the story does not mean that you don't get to cry at the sad parts. Jesus wept. He stood at that tomb and he wept. He knew he was going to call Lazarus forth. He knew he was about to breathe life into Lazarus, and yet he wept. His heart ached. He felt the pain of the sisters that wept. He wept because Lazarus wasn't there in that moment. He wept. He hurt. And that's who he is, and he weeps with us. He is close to the brokenhearted. We see that in Psalms 34. It says that he's close to the brokenhearted. He draws near to those whose hearts are broken. He's not scared of your broken heart. Isaiah 53:3 tells us that he was despised and rejected, a man of sorrow, acquainted with the deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we did not care. Isaiah 53:4 says, yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrow that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God. And we thought it was a punishment for his own sin. But really his heart ached because he carried our sorrows. He bore our sorrows. I think about that. You know, when we think about the crucifixion and we think about the physical pain and the aching, but I think about the times in those moments where all the sorrow that you have felt in your entire life sat on the chest of Jesus while he hung on that cross. He felt every ache, every moan, every pain. You know, when you weep and you hurt so deeply that your bones hurt, you know that feeling like the hole is in your stomach and it's never going to be filled? And you think, I can't live with this pain. I'm going to die because this pain is so great. He felt that for all of us. He bore that. Because he knew there would be a moment where we came to that place in our life and we wouldn't be able to take it, and we had to give it to him. And so he said, I'm going to take it now. I'm going to carry it now. So in that moment when you can't carry it, it's done. It's paid for. It's taken care of. Because that's who he was. He understood sorrow. He understood heartbreak. One thing that has ruminated with me or has been very present with me through this most recent loss is this idea that Christ weeps with us. He's close to us. He loves us. When you love someone, if their heart breaks, your heart breaks, right? I mean, you don't love them if it doesn't. We might need some more seminars on, marriage after this. You're going to look at your spouse and be like, wait a minute. You were a little too happy the other day when I was sad. But he does. When you love someone and their heart breaks, your heart breaks. And that is part of the struggle with grief, is that you don't just grieve the loss you feel. You also grieve when you see the people you love grieve, right? So it compounds. And I think about the fact that he grieves with us. And so I was thinking about my father, and that he was, taken from this world, and how that there's been this collective grieving that's happened. And I've been saying sometimes people grieve for you, but this time people have been grieving with us because it's been our loss. It's not just my family. It's not just my dad. He was I'm not trying to make this a David Hill memorial, but he was a father to so many. And I know that, and I was thrilled that so many people said he was like a dad to me, or he was a dad to me, because he was a man that loved deeply. And there was plenty of him to go around, believe you me. I was happy for people to take him at times. I was glad for him to share the love. But it's been our loss. And so I think about the fact that if Christ knew that when David Hill was taken from this earth, that the earth would weep, that people would break, their hearts would ache, and he knew he was going to feel every single sorrow that we all felt. He knew that in those deep, deep moments of pain, he was going to sit with us. And he still chose to allow that passing. He still chose to allow that to happen. I have to believe that there was a purpose within it, right? We have to believe that if he's willing to suffer with us while we weep, he knows what's going on, that he has a plan, and that he's big enough to take care of all of our suffering. And I have to believe that he loved David Hill that much, that he said, all of these people are going to weep and they're going to grieve. And this could be your loved one too that you've lost. But we have to say, my loved one was so deeply loved by God that my loved one deserved to be where they are. They deserve to have peace and hope for eternity. God loved them so much that he said, I'm going to sit with the people that you're leaving behind, and my heart's going to break with theirs so that you can be where you are. And that gives me hope. And that brings me comfort knowing that in my darkest of moments, through this whole experience, that he's weeping with me and he's carrying me. And I'm going to tell you, it's not just him in those moments where it's just he and I. It's the church. And I just want to tell the church something. Through this experience with my family, we have felt so loved and so cared for and so seen and so cherished because of the words that have been spoken and the kindness that has been shown and the prayers that have gone up and the stories that have been shared. I could not imagine having gone through this loss without you. I mean that. We don't know what we would have done without you. And I am telling you that the church is a powerful, powerful force during the deepest, darkest grief in someone's life. You can absolutely change the course of someone's whole experience with grief with your love. Leaning into connection is really, really important. It's really important to love someone through their grief. It's really important to be present for someone. But if you can't say something nice, so I'm going to give you a few tips. Please don't tell a grieving person that heaven needed another angel. Maybe they can say it. You can say that about your own loss. But listen, if someone had told me that the day David Hill was being buried, I would have said, Jesus has enough angels, and David Hill wasn't that great. He could have stayed this side of earth for a little bit longer. Don't try to give them answers. Don't try to tell them why it happened. Because we don't know. Don't try to produce a solution to their grief, right? You're not going to fix it. What people need is love. What they need to hear is, I love you. I'm here for you. Acknowledge their pain. I know this is hard. I'm so sorry you're hurting. I'm praying for you. Let me know if there's anything you need. And I'm going to tell you, that means instrumental care too. That's not just flowers, which we love, and it's not just it's not just very spiritual things. That is, you're not, because a grieving person's not going to call and say, oh, this has been such a terrible day, and my own experience, I sat in Dollar General and cried because David Hill bought the trash bags, and I was buying trash bags. That wasn't my job. I didn't know what size bags to buy, and I'm in Dollar General crying while I buy trash bags. I was not going to call anybody and say, I just fell apart buying trash bags. But what people do is they show up and they say, people brought toilet paper to our house. Do you know, I was not thinking about toilet paper during our grief, but we needed it. They brought paper towels. They brought plates and forks. They didn't say, call me. They just showed up with those things. And that's what you can do. You just show up. If you want to do something, you can do those things. You just show up and do. And whoever it is that's grieving and aching and hurting, they will absolutely appreciate it. Because during grief, instrumental care is really difficult. And we have grief brain and we don't remember things. And we can't even make a grocery list sometimes. And so just showing up and doing is powerful. Telling them you love them. Telling them you're praying for them. Sending them a text. Don't tell them, well, God's going to take your pain and do something good for others. He might. He probably will. But right now, I don't need to hear that God was willing to sacrifice my father for someone else. What I need to hear right now is God's going to take the pain that we experience and bring healing, right? And good does come from it because God is the only one that can take what is broken and demolished and do real restoration. That's the beauty of God. Man can piece things together. Man, doctors stitch, God heals, right? And so in our grief and in our brokenness, we can't really truly bring growth from that, but God can. And not crushing us so that he can do something with us, but seeing the broken within us and bringing healing. I want you to know that there is absolutely always hope. You don't always believe it. You don't always feel it, and that's okay. Because we're limited. We have small capacity sometimes. But there is always hope. And you don't have to declare loudly in faith, because, they say, well, you just need faith the size of a mustard seed. Well, sometimes when you're grieving, a mustard seed is far more than you have, right? Yeah, it's a boulder, yeah. And so you don't have to proclaim, because there's hope regardless. I'm telling you, the hope of Christ does not depend on you. It is present regardless. It is there no matter what. If it depended on me, there would be no hope. I would never experience it. But his hope surpasses what I can do and what I know and what I'm capable of. And so no matter what is happening, there is always hope. There is always healing that is possible. And even though you can't see it, it is there. And it is something that God can do in your life. Addie, I don't know if you want to share. You said that you wanted to talk about what you were told after your loss. I didn't know if you wanted a moment to share that.
I had a really hard time finding the words to even talk to God. I was angry. And every time I'm like, I should be praying, I didn't know what to say. Even praying for people for healing when I thought that that's what I had asked for, and in my eyes, he didn't do that for me. But I know ultimately, they were safe and, all of that. But in the moment, you don't feel that. And someone told me right over here, I'm standing in that aisle, and they said, it's okay if you can't pray right now, if you can't find the words, because we're covering you with prayer. And I can't tell you how many times that I have gone back to that and known that people around me love me and they are covering me. They have my back. And that's something we talk about all the time, is that God did not mean for us to do life alone.
That's right.
We need each other. And I truly believe that, when this shift in our church about others I'm so proud to be a part of Lighthouse and to see that we are truly showing up for people, not just in the good times and just whatever life brings, we're doing life together. And when somebody falls, we're not there to fix them. Sometimes we talk about, a hole in the floor. Rachel is way better at telling this analogy, but grief is like that. Sometimes you fall in the hole. Most of the time in the beginning you fall in it. You kind of learn to walk around it, and then sometimes you're like, oh, I fell in again. Sometimes people sit at the top of that hole and they help, pull you out if you're ready for that. But sometimes people crawl in that hole with you and they sit in the darkness with you.
That's right.
And I can't tell you, I truly believe that is one of the ways that God saved my life, is because he put people in my life that sat with me
Yep.
in those ashes and didn't leave me. And I don't know where I would be right now if that hadn't have happened. So I'm grateful for his grace and that he keeps fighting for us and that he keeps putting people in our life to be his hands and feet.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Thank you. So you're the vessel of hope in someone else's really dark moment. Because like I said, hope isn't always, it can't be summoned from within, It comes from other places. So we carry each other. We love each other. We sit with each other. We hold each other. And we know that in those moments, God works through us. Because God will work through every single one of you to facilitate hope and healing for someone else. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what you've experienced or how you've failed or how you've succeeded, God absolutely can work through you to be hope and to be light for someone else. And that's what he's called us to do. In our group, we are very, very blessed to have the privilege of holding stories. When you work with hurting people, oftentimes your role is to become a container. And you have to be a pretty big container because there's big things that happen in people's lives. And that is, it's a privilege. It is an absolute honor to hear someone else's story, because it's hard to tell a story when there's pain involved, when there's suffering. And so we in group are containers for each other. We hold each other's stories. And we reached out to group members and we said, would you be willing to share with the church some of the things that you wished you'd known or someone had told you during your grieving moment? And like the amazing people they are, because the people in our group are phenomenal, they shared with us. And so Addie's going to share some of that wisdom.
It's okay to grieve no matter how long it takes. I wish I had known that there are other people that grieve like I do. Some days are harder than others. I wish I had known that it's okay to not be okay. Everyone grieves differently. I may not grieve like you do. It's okay to grieve in your own way. You're not alone in your grief you feel. I held my grief in for so long that I began to just ignore it and try to get used to living with it. But now I know that I don't have to do that anymore, and I deserve better. Your situation might look different than others around you. Grief is grief, and no one can tell you that your pain is not worth grieving over. And the last one, and I hope every person in this room, if you don't get anything else out of this, you are not alone. There is hope.
It's true. There is hope, absolutely. We are very honored that you all gave us space and time. We recognize that to come tonight and to hear this required strength and courage, because I'm sure you've all looked back on your life in this experience and you've recognized the things you've grieved over. But you've sat with us in this room and you've allowed us to be vulnerable, and you've been vulnerable, and I love that we did this together tonight. I want us all to know that hope is available for each of us. Healing is available, and grieving is okay. and we will do it together. Pastor Lance is going to come tonight, and he's got a few comments, and he's going to lead us in a prayer of hope before we close out.
Didn't they do absolutely awesome? Could we give them a hand right now? Woo. Yes, 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 yes. I love when people speak from their heart. And I thoroughly desire things just like this. Being transparent, being open, talking about the things we need to talk about to help us through this thing called life. And I feel such a presence of the peace of God in this place. And we're going to pray, and we're going to sing one chorus. Would that be okay before we leave? And these ladies up here are qualified. At least I was going to have them introduced, and I forgot. But at least two of them are licensed counselors. The other is very much qualified to be that as well. And so we are hearing from the best of the best, and I thank God for what is in this church. Our help is here. Can you say amen? And Philippians 4:7, and the peace of God which passeth all understanding shall keep your hearts. How many ever said, I feel like I'm losing my mind? Shall keep your hearts and minds. Shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So when your heart is broken, you have a promise. He's going to take care of your heart. He's going to keep it. And when your mind feels like it's being lost, guess what? God's going to help you to think again, to move again, to act again, to take control, and to have peace in your mind again. Why don't you stand right now? There's an old song that goes, peace, peace. I want you to help me sing it. Wonderful peace coming down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever, I pray. With fathomless billows of love. Let's sing it one more time before we pray. Peace, 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 peace. Wonderful peace coming down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever, I pray. With fathomless billows of love. Would you help me pray? Let's pray aloud. God, we thank you for your blessings. I feel your spirit in this house, God. I feel not only recovery, but victory, and your sense of joy and hope that it's that peace that passeth all understanding, God. You order our steps in your way, and our lives are in your hands. We're leaning in you tonight. And we give you thanks for what you've brought us through and the purpose that you're serving in our lives right now. And God, what you are going to take us through tomorrow for whatever tomorrow holds. And God, we know that in everything you proclaim victory in our lives. I pray a blessing upon each and every one tonight. Those watching online, those in the sanctuary, I pray that you bless their relationships, Bless their finances, heal their hearts, bless their homes. I'm asking you to wrap your arms around them. Put a smile on our face. God, put a laugh in our lives. And let us understand that you are the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. And you have everything under control. Even when I don't feel it and I don't see it and I receive bad news, you can turn it all around. You've done it before and you'll do it again. And we thank you for your promises that are yea and amen. Could everybody give the Lord a huge hand clap of praise? Come on, has he ever answered a prayer for you? He's going to do it again. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Our relationship is vertical and horizontal, so hug about 5 people right now. It's a hugging moment right now. I'm just telling you, it's a hugging moment. Yeah, step across, give somebody a hug, tell somebody you love them, encourage somebody. You're walking with God. Your future is bright. God bless.